Imagine a world teetering on the edge of chaos, where mighty empires that once ruled the seas and lands with unmatched power suddenly find themselves besieged by mysterious forces. This was the reality of the Late Bronze Age, a time when civilizations like Egypt, the Mycenaeans, and the Hittites flourished, connected by vast networks of trade and diplomacy. Yet, in the blink of an eye, this world was thrown into disarray. The Sea Peoples, an enigmatic confederation of naval raiders, emerged from the shadows of history, striking fear into the hearts of the ancient world. They were not merely pirates or invaders. They were a force of nature, challenging the very foundations of these great civilizations. Who were they? Where did they come from? And what drove them to launch such devastating attacks? These questions have puzzled historians and archaeologists for centuries, and today, we embark on a journey to uncover the truth behind these ancient mariners. Join us as we dive into the story of the Sea Peoples, a tale of mystery, warfare, and the collapse of an entire age. By the end of this journey, you'll understand why the Sea Peoples remain one of history's most captivating enigmas, and how their actions reshaped the ancient world forever.
If you're just joining us for the first time, hit that subscribe button to join the community. Don't forget to share your thoughts. Your insights shape the mystery.
Section 1. The Late Bronze Age Civilizations. The world of the Late Bronze Age, 1600 to 1200 BCE. The Late Bronze Age was a remarkable period in human history, characterized by the rise and dominance of some of the most powerful and sophisticated civilizations the world had ever seen. This era, spanning from approximately 1600 to 1200 BCE, saw the emergence and flourishing of complex societies across the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East, including the Egyptians, Hittites, Mycenaeans, and Minoans, among others. These civilizations were interconnected through an intricate web of trade routes, diplomatic alliances, and cultural exchanges, making this period one of unprecedented globalization in the ancient world. The Late Bronze Age was not merely a time of isolated empires. Rather, it was a vibrant and dynamic world where ideas, goods, and people flowed freely across borders. This interconnectedness was facilitated by advances in technology, particularly in seafaring and metallurgy, which enabled long-distance trade and communication. Cities and kingdoms across the region were linked by shared interests in commerce, politics, and military alliances, creating a complex and interdependent network of relationships. Egypt was the most powerful and enduring of these civilizations. Under the rule of pharaohs like Amenhotep III and Ramesses II, Egypt controlled vast territories, including Nubia to the south and the Levant to the northeast. The Nile River was the lifeblood of Egypt, providing fertile land for agriculture and serving as a major artery for trade. The Egyptian state was highly centralized, with a strong bureaucracy that managed everything from grain production to the construction of monumental structures like temples and pyramids. Religion played a central role in Egyptian society, with the pharaoh revered as a god-king who mediated between the people and the divine. The religious and cultural achievements of the Egyptians, such as the construction of the temples at Karnak and Abu Simbel, are still celebrated today as marvels of human ingenuity. The Hittite Empire, based in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, was another major power during this period. The Hittites were known for their military prowess, particularly their use of chariots in warfare. Their capital, Hattusa, was a fortified city with massive walls and elaborate temples, reflecting the strength and sophistication of their society. The Hittites were also skilled diplomats, often engaging in complex negotiations with neighboring powers like Egypt. One of the most famous diplomatic achievements of the Hittites was the Treaty of Kadesh, a peace agreement signed with Egypt after the famous Battle of Kadesh. This treaty, often regarded as the first known international peace treaty, was a landmark in the history of diplomacy. The Mycenaean civilization, centered on mainland Greece, was the dominant power in the Aegean region. The Mycenaeans were a warrior society, known for their heavily fortified palace complexes, such as those at Mycenae and Terens. These palaces were not only centers of political power, but also hubs of economic activity, where craftsmen produced goods for both domestic consumption and export. The Mycenaeans were also skilled sailors and traders, establishing colonies and trading posts across the Mediterranean. Their influence extended as far as the Levant and Egypt, and they played a key role in the cultural and economic exchange that characterized the Late Bronze Age. Minoan civilization on the island of Crete was another significant power in the Aegean. The Minoans were known for their advanced architecture, art, and writing systems, such as Linear A, which remains undeciphered. The Palace of Knossos, with its labyrinthine layout and elaborate frescoes, is one of the most famous Minoan sites, and is often associated with the legend of the Minotaur. The Minoans were also skilled seafarers, engaging in extensive trade with other civilizations across the Mediterranean. Their culture influenced the Mycenaeans, who adopted many aspects of Minoan art, religion, and administration. In the Levant, a region that includes modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Israel, and Jordan, city-states like Ugarit, Byblos, and Sidon played crucial roles in the regional trade networks. These cities were strategically located along the coast, allowing them to act as intermediaries between the great empires of the Near East and the Mediterranean.
Ugarit, in particular, was a major trading hub, where goods from Egypt, Anatolia, Cyprus, and the Aegean were exchanged. The city was also a center of cultural exchange, where scribes used a cuneiform alphabet to write in multiple languages, reflecting the diverse and cosmopolitan nature of the region. Trade and diplomacy in the Late Bronze Age. The Late Bronze Age was marked by a high degree of economic and diplomatic interdependence among these civilizations. Trade was the lifeblood of the ancient economy, with merchants and sailors transporting goods across vast distances by land and sea. The Mediterranean Sea was a major highway for trade, with ships plying the waters between Egypt, Crete, the Levant, Anatolia, and the Aegean. Goods such as grain, wine, oil, textiles, pottery, and metals were exchanged, along with luxury items like ivory, gold, and precious stones. The demand for bronze, an alloy of copper and tin, was particularly high, as it was the primary material for tools, weapons, and armor. The scarcity of tin made it a valuable commodity, often sourced from distant regions like Afghanistan and possibly even Cornwall in Britain. Diplomacy played a crucial role in maintaining the stability of this interconnected world. The rulers of the major powers engaged in regular correspondence, as evidenced by the Amarna letters, a collection of clay tablets discovered in Egypt. These letters reveal the complexity of international relations in the Late Bronze Age, with kings addressing each other as brothers and exchanging gifts, marriage alliances, and diplomatic favors. The letters also provide insights into the challenges faced by these rulers, such as border disputes, rebellions, and the need for military alliances. The Amarna letters are particularly valuable for understanding the role of Egypt in the broader Mediterranean world. They document Egypt's relations with other major powers, such as the Hittites, Mitanni, and Babylonians, as well as with smaller states and vassals in the Levant. The letters reveal the diplomatic maneuvering that was necessary to maintain Egypt's influence in the region, as well as the delicate balance of power that existed among the major states. Military and technological advancements. The Late Bronze Age was also a period of significant military and technological innovation. The development of the chariot was one of the most important advancements of the time. Chariots were light, fast, and highly maneuverable, making them a formidable weapon on the battlefield. They were used by both the Hittites and Egyptians in their wars and were often depicted in art and inscriptions as symbols of royal power. The chariot revolutionized warfare, allowing armies to move quickly across the battlefield, outflank enemies, and deliver devastating attacks. In addition to the chariot, Advancements in metallurgy played a crucial role in the development of military technology. The widespread use of bronze for weapons and armor gave armies a significant advantage in battle. Bronze swords, spears, and shields were stronger and more durable than those made of stone or copper. The production of bronze required a complex supply chain, as it depended on the availability of both copper and tin. This dependency on trade for essential resources made the major powers vulnerable to disruptions in their supply lines, which would become a critical factor in the eventual collapse of these civilizations. The fortification of cities was another key aspect of military strategy during this period. The Mycenaeans, in particular, were known for their heavily fortified palace complexes, which were built on high ground and surrounded by massive walls. These fortifications were designed to protect against both external invasions and internal rebellions. The walls of Mycenae, known as the Cyclopean Walls, due to their massive size, were a testament to the engineering skills of the Mycenaeans and their concern for security. Section 2. The Bronze Age Collapse. Overview of the Bronze Age Collapse. The Bronze Age collapse, occurring around 1200 BCE, stands as one of the most significant and mysterious periods of upheaval in ancient history. This era witnessed the sudden and catastrophic decline of several powerful and interconnected civilizations across the Eastern Mediterranean and Near East. Over a relatively short span of time, the once thriving empires of the Mycenaeans, Hittites, and several Levantine city-states crumbled, leading to what some historians have described as Dark Age. The complexity of this collapse has puzzled scholars for centuries, as it was not the result of a single event, but rather a confluence of factors.
Earthquakes and seismic activity. The Eastern Mediterranean is a seismically active region, and there is substantial archaeological evidence to suggest that earthquakes played a significant role in the destruction of many cities during the Late Bronze Age. The cities of Troy, Mycenae, and Ugarit, among others, show signs of widespread destruction that could be attributed to seismic activity. These earthquakes would have caused not only physical destruction, but also psychological and social upheaval, as communities struggled to rebuild in the aftermath. The repeated occurrence of earthquakes in a short period could have weakened the structures of these societies, both literally and figuratively, making them more vulnerable to other forms of disruption. Volcanic eruptions and tsunamis. Although less commonly discussed, volcanic eruptions and tsunamis may have also contributed to the environmental and social instability of the period. The eruption of the Thera, Santorini volcano, which occurred around 1600 BCE, is often cited as a significant event that impacted the Aegean region. While this eruption predates the Bronze Age collapse by several centuries, its effects on climate and the environment could have had long-term consequences that contributed to the vulnerability of later societies. Additionally, there is evidence to suggest that tsunamis, possibly triggered by seismic activity, could have struck coastal cities, causing further destruction and loss of life. Social and economic unrest. The environmental challenges of the Late Bronze Age were compounded by social and economic unrest, which further destabilized the civilizations of the time. The combination of food shortages, population displacement, and the breakdown of trade networks created a perfect storm of conditions that led to widespread conflict, the collapse of central authorities, and the rise of local warlords. Internal rebellions and civil strife. As environmental conditions worsened, many of the great empires of the Late Bronze Age experienced internal rebellions and civil wars. The Hittite Empire, for example, which had been a dominant power in Anatolia, was weakened by internal divisions and the challenges of maintaining control over its vast territories. The Hittite king, Suppiluliuma II, faced significant challenges in keeping his vassal states in line, and there is evidence that many of these states rebelled against Hittite authority during this period. Similar patterns of internal strife can be seen in other regions, where local leaders, faced with the failure of central authorities to address the growing crises, began to assert their independence. Decline in trade and economic disintegration. The interconnected trade networks of the Late Bronze Age were essential to the prosperity of the civilizations of the time. These networks facilitated the exchange of vital resources, such as tin, necessary for bronze production, luxury goods, and foodstuffs. However, as environmental and social conditions deteriorated, these trade networks began to break down. The decline in trade had a cascading effect on the economies of these regions, as cities that had once thrived on commerce found themselves cut off from their traditional sources of wealth. This economic disintegration further weakened the power of central governments and contributed to the overall collapse of these civilizations. Population displacement and migration. The combination of environmental stress and social unrest led to significant population displacement during the Late Bronze Age. As agricultural production declined and cities were destroyed, large numbers of people were forced to leave their homes in search of food, security, and new opportunities. This migration of peoples contributed to the instability of the region, as displaced populations came into conflict with existing communities over resources and territory. In some cases, these migrations led to the formation of new groups, such as the Sea Peoples, who would go on to play a central role in the events of the Bronze Age collapse. The role of the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples are often cited as one of the primary catalysts for the Bronze Age collapse. This enigmatic confederation of maritime raiders and warriors appeared suddenly in the historical record around the 13th century BCE, launching a series of devastating attacks on the coastal cities and empires of the Eastern Mediterranean. The origins, identity, and motivations of the Sea Peoples remain subjects of intense debate among historians, but their impact on the civilizations of the time is undeniable. Marauding invaders. The Sea Peoples are first mentioned in Egyptian records, where they are described as a confederation of different groups, including the Peliset, Philistines, Cheker, Shekelesh, Denyen, and Wishesh, among others.
These groups are often depicted as fierce warriors, armed with swords, spears, and shields, and wearing distinctive feathered helmets. The Sea Peoples conducted a series of raids and invasions across the Eastern Mediterranean, targeting major cities, trade routes, and even entire empires. Their attacks were characterized by their ferocity and their focus on coastal regions, which were vulnerable to seaborne assaults. Impact on civilizations. The invasions of the Sea Peoples had a devastating impact on the civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Hittite Empire, already weakened by internal strife and environmental challenges, was unable to withstand their onslaught and eventually collapsed. The Hittite capital, Hattusa, was destroyed, and the empire fragmented into smaller, less powerful states. In the Levant, cities like Ugarit, Al-Alaq, and Hazor were sacked and burned, leaving behind layers of destruction that can still be seen in the archaeological record. The Mycenaean civilization in Greece also suffered greatly, with many of its palace centers destroyed and its population declining sharply. The Sea Peoples' invasions disrupted trade, led to the loss of knowledge and skills, and contributed to the overall decline of the region. The Egyptian response. The Egyptian New Kingdom under pharaohs like Ramesses III faced significant challenges from the Sea Peoples. The famous Battle of the Delta, fought around 1175 BCE, saw the Egyptians successfully repel a large-scale invasion by the Sea Peoples. Ramesses III's account of the battle, inscribed on the walls of his mortuary temple at Medinet Habu, describes how the Sea Peoples attacked Egypt by both land and sea but were ultimately defeated by the Egyptian army and navy. This victory helped to preserve Egypt's independence and stability for a time, but it came at a great cost. The strain of defending against the Sea Peoples and other external threats weakened the Egyptian state, contributing to its eventual decline in the later years of the New Kingdom. Origins and legacy. The origins of the Sea Peoples remain a mystery, with various theories suggesting that they may have come from the Aegean, Anatolia, or even as far away as the Western Mediterranean. Some scholars believe that they were displaced populations driven by the same environmental and social factors that contributed to the collapse of the Bronze Age civilizations. Others suggest that they were mercenaries or pirates who took advantage of the chaos of the period to raid and plunder. Section 3. The enigmatic Sea Peoples. Introduction to the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples remain one of the most enigmatic and debated groups in ancient history. Emerging suddenly in the historical record around the 13th century BCE, they played a significant role in the collapse of several major civilizations in the Eastern Mediterranean. The term Sea Peoples is a modern designation used to describe a confederation of seafaring raiders and migrants whose precise origins and identities are still the subject of much scholarly debate. They are primarily known from Egyptian sources, particularly the inscriptions of Pharaoh Ramesses III, who recorded their invasions and his victories over them. However, evidence of their activities has also been found in the archaeological remains of the Hittites, the Mycenaeans, and other ancient cultures affected by their movements. Theories of origin. The question of where the Sea Peoples came from has intrigued historians and archaeologists for over a century. Several theories have been proposed, each with varying degrees of evidence and scholarly support. The Aegean hypothesis. One of the most widely accepted theories is that the Sea Peoples originated from the Aegean region, particularly from areas that are now part of Greece and western Turkey. This theory suggests that they were displaced populations, possibly Mycenaean Greeks, who fled their homelands due to the social and political upheaval caused by the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization. The similarities between the material culture of the Sea Peoples, as found in the archaeological record, and that of the Mycenaeans lend some support to this idea. For example, certain types of pottery and weapons used by the Sea Peoples closely resemble those found in Mycenaean contexts. The Anatolian hypothesis. Another theory posits that the Sea Peoples came from Anatolia, the region known today as Turkey. This theory is supported by the fact that several of the groups identified as Sea Peoples, such as the Luca, are known to have lived in Anatolia. The Hittites, who ruled much of Anatolia during the Late Bronze Age, also recorded conflicts with groups that could be identified as part of the Sea Peoples Confederation. The collapse of the Hittite Empire might have driven these groups to seek new territories, leading them to migrate across the Mediterranean. The Western Mediterranean hypothesis. A less commonly held but intriguing theory is that the Sea Peoples originated from the Western Mediterranean, possibly from regions like Sardinia, Sicily, or even the Iberian Peninsula. This theory is based on linguistic evidence and certain cultural practices that suggest a connection between the Sea Peoples and these areas. For instance, the Shurden, one of the groups identified as Sea Peoples, share a name with the island of Sardinia, leading some scholars to suggest that they may have originated there. A multinational confederation. Some scholars argue that the Sea Peoples were not a single ethnic or cultural group, but rather a coalition of different peoples from various regions. This theory suggests that the Sea Peoples were united not by a common origin but by shared goals, such as the desire to find new lands and resources in the face of the social and environmental crises of the Late Bronze Age. This would explain the diversity of names and cultural attributes associated with them in the historical record. Invasions and military campaigns. The Sea Peoples are best known for their invasions and military campaigns, which had a profound impact on the civilizations of the Eastern Mediterranean. The Egyptian campaigns. The most detailed accounts of the Sea Peoples come from Egyptian sources, particularly the inscriptions of Pharaoh Ramesses III at Medinet Habu. According to these records, the Sea Peoples launched a series of coordinated attacks on Egypt around 1177 BCE. They came by both land and sea, overwhelming the Egyptian defenses in the Nile Delta. However, Ramesses III was able to mount a successful counteroffensive, defeating the Sea Peoples in a series of battles and ultimately repelling their invasion. The Medinet Habu inscriptions depict the Sea Peoples as a formidable and well-organized force, equipped with advanced weaponry and large fleets of ships. The destruction of cities. Archaeological evidence indicates that the Sea Peoples were responsible for the destruction of several major cities across the Eastern Mediterranean. Sites such as Ugarit in Syria, Hattusa in Anatolia, and many of the Mycenaean palace centers in Greece show clear signs of violent destruction that can be attributed to the Sea Peoples. These cities were often burned to the ground, and their inhabitants either killed or forced to flee. The sudden and widespread nature of this destruction suggests that the Sea Peoples were not merely raiders but were engaged in a concerted effort to conquer and settle new territories. The impact on the Hittite Empire. The Sea Peoples' invasions played a significant role in the collapse of the Hittite Empire. The Hittites, who had been one of the dominant powers in the region, were already weakened by internal strife and environmental challenges when the Sea Peoples began their assaults. The Hittite capital of Hattusa was destroyed, and the empire fragmented into smaller, less powerful states. The Sea Peoples' invasions were not the sole cause of the Hittite collapse, but they were a major contributing factor. The aftermath of the invasions. In the aftermath of the Sea Peoples' invasions, the political and cultural landscape of the Eastern Mediterranean was dramatically altered. Many of the great civilizations of the Late Bronze Age were either destroyed or severely weakened, leading to a period of decline and fragmentation known as the Dark Age. However, the Sea Peoples themselves did not vanish from history. Some of the groups that made up the Sea Peoples, such as the Philistines, established themselves in new territories and played significant roles in the subsequent history of the region. The legacy of the Sea Peoples. The legacy of the Sea Peoples is complex and multifaceted. While they are often remembered as destroyers of civilizations, their impact on the ancient world was not entirely negative. The Philistines and the formation of new societies. One of the most enduring legacies of the Sea Peoples is the establishment of the Philistines in the southern Levant. The Philistines are widely believed to have been one of the groups that made up the Sea Peoples, and they went on to play a major role in the history of the region. The Philistines settled in what is now the Gaza Strip in southern Israel, where they established a confederation of city-states, including Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ashdod. They became one of the principal adversaries of the Israelites, as described in the Hebrew Bible, and their culture and influence persisted for centuries. Cultural and technological influence. The Sea Peoples, despite their reputation as invaders, also contributed to the cultural and technological development of the regions they settled. The Philistines, for example, are credited with introducing new pottery styles and architectural techniques to the Levant. The Sea Peoples also played a role in the transition from the Bronze Age to the Iron Age, as they were among the first groups to adopt ironworking technology. This technological shift had far-reaching consequences, leading to the development of more advanced tools and weapons and eventually giving rise to the Iron Age civilizations. The role in the Bronze Age collapse. The Sea Peoples were not the sole cause of the Bronze Age collapse, but their invasions were a major factor in the events that brought an end to the Late Bronze Age civilizations. The disruption they caused to trade networks, political structures, and social systems contributed to the broader collapse of the interconnected world of the Eastern Mediterranean. In this sense, the Sea Peoples were both a symptom and a cause of the broader crises of the time. The enduring mystery. The Sea Peoples remain a subject of fascination and mystery in the study of ancient history. Despite the extensive research and debate surrounding their origins, identity, and impact, many questions remain unanswered. The lack of written records from the Sea Peoples themselves means that much of what we know about them comes from the accounts of their enemies, such as the Egyptians. This has led to a somewhat one-sided view of the Sea Peoples as purely destructive forces, when in reality, their story is likely more complex. Section 4. The Sea Peoples and the Collapse of Civilizations. The Mycenaean Collapse. The Sea Peoples were a significant factor in the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization, one of the major powers in the Aegean during the Late Bronze Age. The Mycenaean Greeks, known for their fortified palaces and complex societal structures, were deeply interconnected with other Eastern Mediterranean civilizations through trade, warfare, and diplomacy. By the late 13th century BCE, however, the Mycenaean civilization began to experience a rapid decline, culminating in its eventual disappearance from the historical record. The role of the Sea Peoples in Mycenaean decline. Archaeological evidence suggests that the Mycenaean palaces, which had been centers of administration, culture, and economy, were destroyed in a series of violent events. The destruction of sites such as Pylos, Mycenae, and Tiryns is often attributed to the incursions of the Sea Peoples. The palatial centers were burned and abandoned, and the once thriving Mycenaean civilization fragmented into smaller, less centralized communities. While the exact role of the Sea Peoples in this collapse remains a topic of debate, it is clear that their arrival in the Aegean contributed to the destabilization of Mycenaean society. Internal factors and systemic collapse. It is important to note that the collapse of the Mycenaean civilization was likely due to a combination of factors, both internal and external. The Mycenaeans faced significant internal challenges, including social unrest, economic difficulties, and environmental changes such as drought. These issues weakened the Mycenaean state, making it more vulnerable to external threats like the Sea Peoples. The destruction of the palaces and the breakdown of centralized authority led to a period of economic decline and loss of cultural continuity, marking the end of the Mycenaean civilization. The Hittite Empire's downfall. The Hittite Empire, one of the great powers of the Late Bronze Age, also fell victim to the onslaught of the Sea Peoples. The Hittites had established a vast and powerful empire centered in Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, with a capital at Hattusa. Their empire stretched across much of Anatolia and into parts of the Levant, including control over key trade routes and resources. The Sea Peoples invasions. Around the late 13th century BCE, the Hittite Empire began to face increasing pressure from various fronts, including invasions by the Sea Peoples. The Sea Peoples attacked coastal cities and disrupted trade networks that were vital to the Hittite economy. The loss of key port cities and the inability to maintain control over their territories weakened the Hittite state. Additionally, internal strife, including succession disputes and rebellions, further destabilized the empire. The destruction of Hattusa. The final blow to the Hittite Empire came with the destruction of its capital, Hattusa, around 1200 BCE. The city, which had been a center of political and cultural life for the Hittites, was burned and abandoned. While the exact cause of Hattusa's destruction remains unclear, it is likely that the Sea Peoples played a role in the city's downfall, either directly through invasion or indirectly by exacerbating the internal conflicts that led to its collapse. The fragmentation of the Hittite territories. In the aftermath of the Hittite Empire's collapse, the region of Anatolia became fragmented into smaller, independent states. These Neo-Hittite states, while culturally connected to the Hittite tradition, were much weaker than the centralized empire that had preceded them. The loss of Hattusa and the disintegration of the empire marked the end of Hittite dominance in the region, paving the way for the rise of new powers in the Iron Age. The Egyptian perspective. Egypt was one of the few civilizations to survive the onslaught of the Sea Peoples, largely due to the military successes of Pharaoh Ramesses III. However, the invasions had a profound impact on Egypt, leading to significant changes in its political and economic structure. Ramesses III's victories. The most detailed accounts of the Sea Peoples' invasions come from Egyptian sources, particularly the inscriptions at Medinet Habu. According to these records, the Sea Peoples launched a series of attacks on Egypt, both by land and sea, around 1177 BCE. Ramesses III mobilized his forces and defeated the invaders in two major battles, one on land and one at sea. These victories were celebrated as great triumphs, and Ramesses III portrayed himself as the savior of Egypt. The impact on Egypt. While Egypt successfully repelled the Sea Peoples, the cost of these campaigns was significant. The military effort drained the Egyptian treasury, and the disruptions caused by the invasions contributed to economic difficulties. The loss of trade routes and the decline of neighboring civilizations also had a negative impact on Egypt's economy. Additionally, the social and political strain of defending against the Sea Peoples contributed to the weakening of the Egyptian state, leading to a gradual decline in its power and influence in the centuries that followed. The settlement of the Philistines. After their defeat by Ramesses III, some of the Sea Peoples, particularly the Philistines, settled in the southern Levant. The Philistines established a series of city-states along the coast, including Gaza, Ashkelon, and Ashdod. These cities became significant players in the region and are frequently mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as adversaries of the Israelites. The Philistines maintained their cultural identity and continued to exert influence in the region for several centuries. The broader Mediterranean collapse. The invasions of the Sea Peoples were part of a broader pattern of collapse that affected the entire Mediterranean region during the Late Bronze Age. This period, often referred to as the Bronze Age collapse, saw the downfall of several major civilizations, including the Mycenaeans, Hittites, and the city-states of the Levant. The disruption of trade networks. One of the most significant consequences of the Sea Peoples' invasions was the disruption of the extensive trade networks that had connected the Eastern Mediterranean. These trade routes were vital for the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture between different regions. The destruction of key ports and cities, combined with the instability caused by the Sea Peoples' raids, led to the collapse of these trade networks. The loss of access to essential resources, such as copper and tin, used to make bronze, further contributed to the decline of Bronze Age civilizations.
The spread of ironworking. In the aftermath of the Bronze Age collapse, the technology of ironworking began to spread throughout the Mediterranean. The Sea Peoples, who were among the early adopters of ironworking, played a role in this technological shift. The transition from bronze to iron marked a significant turning point in the history of the region, as iron tools and weapons were more durable and accessible than their bronze counterparts. This shift contributed to the rise of new powers and the development of the Iron Age civilizations. The Dark Age and cultural transformation. The period following the Bronze Age collapse is often referred to as a Dark Age due to the decline in literacy, urbanization, and cultural production. However, this period also saw significant cultural transformation. New languages, art forms, and social structures emerged in the wake of the collapse, laying the foundations for the classical civilizations of Greece, Rome, and Persia. The memory of the Sea Peoples and the Bronze Age collapse lived on in the myths and legends of these later cultures, shaping their understanding of the past. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this journey, please share it with friends. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave a comment. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss out.